The Last Supper stands as the most iconic and spiritually charged moments in Christian history. In the New Testament, it marks the institution of the Eucharist and the foreshadowing of Jesus' crucifixion. I always tell viewers that the more you read the Urantia Book, the more it begins to make sense to you. I am currently on my third full read-through, and I was finally able to catch great variations in the two accounts of the Last Supper story, which I'll share with you all in today's video. Like many distortions in the Holy Bible, I never liked nor understood the Eucharist, of which will be clarified through the Urantia Book in today's video. Again, like mentioned many times on my channel, Jesus was against ritualistic ceremony, despite using a great deal of symbolism in almost all of his parables. In the Urantia Book, the Last Supper is reinterpreted through a cosmological and revelatory lens, offering expanded insights into Jesus' intentions, the apostles' psychology, and the spiritual significance of the event. Throughout this video, I will speculate on the premise that Judas Iscariot was no longer the 12th apostle of the group 2 days previous to Jesus' crucifixion, considering he had already abandoned his mission at such a time, had already taken steps towards his betrayal, and did not stick around for the entirety of the Last Supper discourse. For those of you that know the Urantia Book, you already know that 12 is a spiritual number that is representative of organization, completion, and divine authority. It is seen in magisterial missions, planetary oversight, and judicial councils, and would most certainly diminish Jesus' final pastoral mission without a 12th ambassador to the kingdom of heaven. Trust me when I say that the largely omitted day, when a child spent one of the last days with God, was no accident, nor insignificant reestablishing the order of the 12. All right, with the speculatory foreshadowing out of the way, please allow me to make some compelling arguments here. In order to get the full grasp of the Last Supper on the 6th, we need to rewind one more day to the event where Jesus spent with only one disciple on April 5th, 30 AD, which ironically was again the same day that Judas Iscariot executed his nefarious plan with his cousin to betray the master. Just for a point of reference, the creature body of Jesus was extinguished on the 7th. That's right, officially, for those of you that are rusty on your biblical canon, John Mark, or Mark for the sake of today's video, was a disciple of the Apostle Peter, and most certainly not one of Jesus' original apostles. The Gospel of Mark was the earliest, briefest, and the most simple record of Jesus' life in 121:8.3. Theologians often cite this text as being a rough outline for many of the other works that came later in the New Testament Bible. This makes the Gospel of Mark perhaps the most important, religious, and arguably most accurate text in the New Testament Bible. We know from paper 121 that Mark wrote these passages from his entire adolescent memory of both himself and, of course, Simon Peter, perhaps more appropriately called the Gospel of Mark and Peter. It is speculated that the actual age of John Mark is debated as ranging between 12 to 16 years of age. John Mark and Peter had an interesting history, which included Mark being only one of the few that only had a partial belief in Peter's witnessing Jesus walking on water, which in reality was a dream Peter had, located in 152:4.4. Mark was one of the chosen few who had the rare opportunity to literally spend an entire day with God. Again, to see the Son is to see the Father, right? So spending a day with Jesus was like spending a day with God. The heart-wrenching story I'll be discussing today will be brief due to brevity purposes. The story begins with Jesus' wish for isolation with his Father for his final day of freedom to the other apostles in 177:0.4. The apostles reluctantly obliged to this request, while Judas took this opportunity to leave the group for his betrayal mission with his cousin as his spokesperson. when Jesus asked for privacy.
Upon hearing these words, David and his armed guards withdrew. But as Jesus started off alone, John Mark came forward with a small basket containing food and water and suggested that if he intended to be away all day, he might find himself hungry. The master smiled on John and reached down to take the basket.
In 177:1.1-2, it goes on stating, as Jesus was about to take the lunch basket from John's hand, the young man ventured to say,
"But master, you may set the basket down while you turn aside to pray and go on without it. Besides, if I should go along to carry the lunch, you would be more free to worship, and I will surely be silent. I will ask no questions and will stay by the basket when you go apart by yourself to pray." While making the speech, the temerity of which astonished some of the nearby listeners, John had made bold to hold the basket. There they stood, both John and Jesus, holding the basket. Presently, the master let go, and looking down on the lad, said, "Since with all your heart you crave to go with me, it shall not be denied to you. We will go off by ourselves and have a good visit. You may ask me any question that arises in your heart, and we will comfort and console each other. You may start out carrying the lunch, and when you grow weary, I will help you. Follow on with me."
Notice the words here, follow on with me. Sound familiar? Hint, hint, it's a similar phrase Jesus used when recruiting his former apostles. Speeding through this section, John Mark learned a great deal of things that day, many of which were to be shared with no one else. A promise that John Mark had faithfully kept throughout his entire life. A notable highlight through this passage was that Jesus called Mark a future
mighty messenger of the kingdom.
In 177:1.4, which was the only time Jesus bestowed this title onto a follower of Jesus. For those of you that are curious, Jesus does give quite a familiar individual psychology response of family dynamics for you Alfred Adler fans out there in 177:2.2. But again, I try to keep these videos short and will attempt to remain on topic here. Another prelude to the likelihood that Mark did become an apostle is where the Last Supper was conducted. Everything Jesus chose to do, and of course not to do, in the Urantia Book had significance. And it would only be fitting that perhaps the greatest symbolic event should occur at the home of an apostle and not a disciple. In case you haven't guessed it, the home was none other than that of John Mark. Well, dare I say it was the home of his parents, because of course John Mark back then was an adolescent, meaning that he was somewhere between the ages of 12 and again 16. In 178:2.8, we learn that
when the apostles reached the city, they met the man with the water pitcher near the gate and followed on after him to the home of John Mark, where the lad's father met them and showed them the upper room in readiness for the evening meal.
All right, well, that's enough now for speculatory romanticizing, at least for the moment. And let's just say that at this point, both David Zebedee in 178:2.3, John Mark, and Jesus likely all knew about the Last Supper secret location due to both David and Jesus already knowing that Judas Iscariot would likely report their location to the authorities if given the opportunity. Since most of you are familiar with the Last Supper story, let me show you a comparison chart when it comes to the structural overview of some of the differences between the Holy Bible and, of course, the Urantia Book. All right, so the first column will be the New Testament Bible, right? The source being the Synoptic Gospels, which I don't need to read those out to you. And then the setting being the upper room in Jerusalem during Passover. Participants were the same 12 participants. And the ritual focus was the institution of the Eucharist, right? And we all know what that ceremony looks like. And then the additional themes were betrayal, humility, and the covenant with man, right? And also when it comes to atonement, I want to throw that one in there as well. The Urantia Book, its source was paper 179, which was, of course, called The Last Supper. Same location, but it happened a day earlier and on the second floor of John Mark's residence, which wasn't revealed until, of course, the Urantia Book came around. And it had similar psychological profiles of the apostles, especially when they started fighting over what place to sit in when it comes to being on the right or left hand of Jesus Christ, right? And being the highest or lowest amongst them. And of course, the additional themes of brotherhood, spiritual unity, and a cosmic mission. So in the New Testament, the Last Supper is traditionally understood as a Passover meal, right? They believed it occurred on Passover, though scholarly debate persists about whether it was a formal Seder. Jesus reinterprets the bread and wine as his body and blood, instituting the Eucharist. The Synoptic Gospels emphasize the sacrificial nature of Jesus' impending death, while John focuses on the washing of feet and Jesus' farewell discourse. The Urantia Book clarifies that Jesus held the supper one day early, knowing that he would be arrested before the official Passover celebration. It emphasizes that Jesus had previously celebrated Passover without the lamb, distancing himself from sacrificial rituals. The meal is portrayed as a deliberate act of spiritual communion, not a ritual of atonement with animal sacrifice. One slight but perhaps significant differentiation between these two texts can be found in 179.0.3, when it indicated that
the apostles knew that Jesus had celebrated other Passovers without the lamb. They knew that he did not personally participate in any sacrificial service of the Jewish system. He had many times partaken of the Paschal lamb as a guest, but always when he was the host, no lamb was served.
This subtle shift reframes the supper as a celebration of spiritual brotherhood, rather than a sacrificial rite. In Matthew 26:28, Jesus says,
"This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins."
This language establishes the Eucharist as a sacrament of remembrance and redemption from sin. The bread and wine become symbols of divine grace and a new covenant. The Urantia Book, however, retains the symbolism of bread and wine, but strips away the sacrificial connotation. Jesus uses the elements to emphasize spiritual nourishment and unity found in 179.5.3.
"Take this bread of remembrance and eat it. I have told you that I am the bread of life. And this bread of life is the united life of the Father and the Son in one gift. The word of the Father, as revealed in the Son, is indeed the bread of life."
Consequently, the focus now shifts from atonement to enlightenment. The ritual becomes a celebration of divine indwelling and cosmic brotherhood, rather than dwelling on the unchangeable past. In the New Testament, John in 13:14 presents the foot washing as a profound act of humility. Jesus, the Master, washes his disciples' feet, teaching servant leadership.
"Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet."
This moment is rich with ethical and theological implications, emphasizing humility, service, and love. The Urantia Book expands this scene through its psychological context. It describes the apostles' unanimous discomfort and internal debate over who should perform the task to wash everyone's feet, and also where to sit at the table, viewing each other as ultimately unequal. Jesus uses this moment to dismantle their hierarchical thinking and reinforce the principle of spiritual equality. In 179.3.8, Jesus says the following in response:
"Do you really understand what I have done to you? You call me master, and you say, well, for so I am. If then the master has washed your feet, why was it that you were unwilling to wash one another's feet? What lesson should you learn from this parable in which the master so willingly does that service which his brethren were unwilling to do for one another? Verily, verily, I say to you, a servant is not greater than the master, neither is one who is sent greater than he who sends him. You have seen the way of service in my life among you, and blessed are you who will have the gracious courage so to serve. But why are you so slow to learn that the secret of greatness in the spiritual kingdom is not like the methods of power in the material world?"
In the Bible, John 14:17 records Jesus' farewell discourse, including the promise of the Holy Spirit, the vine and branches metaphor, and the high priestly prayer. These chapters are rich in theological depth and mystical language. The Urantia Book includes a similar farewell address, but expands it into a cosmic framework. Jesus speaks of his mission not just to Israel, but to the entire universe. He emphasizes the coming of the Spirit of truth and the eternal brotherhood of believers. Jesus then issues an advanced commandment and revision to his love thy neighbor commandment, indicating in 180:1.1,
when I enacted for you a parable indicating how you should be willing to serve one another, I said that I desired to give you a new commandment. And I will do this now as I am about to leave you. You well know the commandment which directs that you love one another, that you love your neighbor even as yourself. But I am not wholly satisfied with even that sincere devotion on the part of my children. I would have you perform still greater acts of love in the kingdom of the believing brotherhood. And so I give you this new commandment, that you love one another even as I have loved you. And by this will all men know that you are my disciples, if you thus love one another.
This quote not only depicts a Lord who feels as though his remaining apostles are ready for such a Herculean task, but more importantly, likely exhibits growth of Jesus during his life in the flesh as well. As a fun and speculative add-on, I will also convey the radical words of caution that Jesus gave his apostles, indicating in 180:0.2,
You well remember when I sent you forth without purse or wallet, and even advised that you take with you no extra clothes. And you will all recall that you lacked nothing. But now you have come upon troublous times. No longer can you depend upon the goodwill of the multitudes. Henceforth, he who has a purse, let him take it with him. When you go out into the world to proclaim this gospel, make such provision for your support as seems best. I have come to bring peace, but it will not appear for some time.
Is this just an obvious statement surrounding the changing polarity of the now dangerous religious politics, or is Jesus insinuating a level of influence that is now leaving his apostles? I'll let you speculate here with me on this last bit. Thank you again for watching today's video. Your continued support, and I'll see you in the next one.